You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in Emily Witt, legal recruiter specializing in tech, health, and life sciences. Beyond the Legal Lens podcast host, career coach, and founder of the Advocates Mic. Emily, how are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, yeah, it's great to have you here. And before we sort of get into it, I just want to thank you on behalf of Lawyer Stories for coming out to our event in Brooklyn with Mean Pug Digital. We had a Lawyer Stories Connect event, and the vibe was unbelievable. We had a great night on a rooftop, beautiful weather in New York. It was great to be there, and it was so cool that you came, and I hope you made some meaningful connections.
Oh, I loved it. I'm so grateful we made the connection. I'm so glad you invited me. And it was one of those gorgeous, I think it was early-ish June, right? Yep. Before, we're not in the thick of the heat of July. And it was a beautiful night. I met some wonderful people. I loved the warmth of your connections. I loved how you bring people together and created such an atmosphere for connection and networking. And it felt very organic and natural. And I met some people that I do hope I can see again and look forward to the next one. So keep me posted.
Wicked cool. I will for sure. So legal recruiting, getting into your career here, legal recruiting is very important for people, to know whether they're just getting into the profession or maybe doing a lateral move, I think you call it in the business. Can you just tell us what exactly that is before we're gonna dive into your story. But I just want sort of from your point of view what legal recruiting actually is.
Yeah, so legal recruiting can be equated to what we call matchmaking. So the origin story usually begins with a client. And in my case, that client can be one of two things. The client can be a law firm, or the client can be an in-house company that is possibly looking to hire their first legal hire. Or if it's on the law firm side, it could be a partner, an associate in terms of the work that I do. There are some search firms out there that do other types of placements in the law, such as paralegals and the like. However, my role right now is exclusively lawyer recruitment. And the client, either law firm or in-house, will come to our office and present us with a particular need. And when I say that, that can also mean as online as well. Yep. And that need will have certain criteria, which we will go over in depth with the client in terms of how many years of experience, what type of background does this candidate have, what is ideal. We'll also ask our client questions, for example, geography, return to work policy, office culture. And then once we've gotten this request from the client, we will either go into our network that we've already built, which we often call our Rolodex, and we might have working relationships with some of these attorneys that we know in our heads already fulfill the requirements our clients are looking for.
Wow.
So often we'll start with our network. And even if our network isn't, they might not be interested, or they may have just made a lateral move, as we talked about earlier. They might have colleagues, friends that might be interested. So our first method is to get in touch with our network about a particular job, and then see if they have anyone else. And then after that, we are tapping into resources to find attorneys that fulfill the requirements that we've been giving. And that's the matchmaking aspect of it.
Wow.
Is that you really, you have to understand your client, you have to understand the culture and what the expectations are, because as you know, there are so many ways to lawyer in this world, and what works for one person might not work for the other. But also a lot of times as you go through the process with the client, and it varies from search to search, each ideal candidate can look a lot different. So not only are you learning a lot about the candidates that you're working with, but you're getting a lot of information from your client and what works for them and what doesn't.
So like, how long do you keep a candidate on file? I mean, these people, like, they're going through their careers, and you might, 1 year, they're a second year associate, and then 8 years goes by and they've been 10 years in. Do you still keep them on file in your Rolodex?
Absolutely. I would say I started on the agency side, or the search firm side of things, in 2016. And I had used LinkedIn at the time, and I still rely on a lot of my referrals that I've known for years and years, particularly now as I've developed a niche for myself, which is this tech and health and life sciences angle. So now that I have this niche, I have a lot of attorneys that I've worked with over the years. They might not be looking, but they're still a part of the ecosystem, so to speak. I try to update them with different types of newsletters. My podcast allows me to connect with my community, but the answer is, once you make that connection with a recruiter, you can maintain that relationship indefinitely.
That's interesting. Okay. And like, how many people do you think are recruits are like in your ecosystem of like the average, let's not say yours, but like the average like legal recruiter? How many people do they sort of have to wrap their arms around, would you say?
Great question. So these types of, let's just use the word nests, take years to develop. And in fact, I'm still building. I could say, within a network, over the years, certainly in the hundreds, possibly thousands of people. I'm not, you might not be communicating with these people every day. You certainly can't. It's impossible to have that kind of bandwidth, which is why usually the client's needs takes front and center when you're going through your matchmaking list.
Of course. Yeah, that's got to be pretty difficult.
People often think recruiters are on the phone all day and we're out to lunch and we're schmoozing with a lot of different people, but it's a lot of administrative work. It's a lot of being diligent and keeping track of your network.
That's interesting. Okay. That's a really good explanation, Emily. That really helps me.
Thank you.
Understand that.
Thank you.
Let's get into your story a little bit, because we featured you on Lawyer Stories social media pages. That's lawyer_stories, and on Facebook and LinkedIn. And you have a really cool story. I mean, you really sort of you met somebody. So going through your story, your legal recruiting career met on a rock climbing wall. began at a rock climbing wall. So like, tell us a little bit about that. Because you had made a friend at a bus terminal, right?
Yes, yeah. I always have to start with the
Isn't
bus.
that cool that like we make friends at bus terminals and we could also make friends on Instagram? So it's really,
Yeah,
you can make friends anywhere, right?
indeed. Yeah. So I started my career coming out of college thinking I wanted to go into journalism or book publishing, which is where I was. And I had reached a point where I was plateauing and I felt that there might be something else out there. And because I had gone to a liberal arts school, I didn't have as much exposure to the world of human resources or recruiting or marketing. So I decided to quit my job in book publishing. But that decision I made because I was commuting from home. I live about 35 minutes outside of Manhattan, and I was waiting for the bus. And it was late at night, and the line was wrapped around, and I met a woman who was about to go to medical school, and she needed someone to travel Europe with. And
Did she just like
lo
ask
and
if you
behold,
at the bus stop? Like,
well, what happened was
before or no? Like I kind of thought it was.
no, we had never met before. Although she did know my dad because she was commuting on the same bus line, but she had known of my dad, not known, recognized
I thought it was like
him.
a Greyhound station or something. I like had envisioned like.
It was the Rockland coaches.
Okay.
At the Port Authority bus terminal.
Okay.
The lines were wrapped around so long that we didn't want to wait online. And I heard her talking to her brother about food, and I wanted sushi. And so next thing you know, we ended up going out to dinner together. And then we knew there was another bus at 9:30. So we were like, rather than wait online, let's go grab a bite to eat and come back.
Yep.
And she convinced me to quit my job.
Wow.
And travel Europe. And she was a complete stranger when I met her. I did do my due diligence. One of my best friends from college, her dad taught in her high school. So I got to find out a little bit of intel, but I did take a total risk. And I went to Europe 5 weeks. And we had a blast. She's still one of my best friends. I was a bridesmaid in her wedding.
Wow.
And that was in line, I think, with sort of this innate ability I have to know good people. Now, I will say not 100% of the time, but my track record is pretty good.
Great.
And so when I came back from this huge expedition to Europe, the market was good, and I was rock climbing near the Port Authority. And one of my rock climbing partners happened to be an associate at the law firm called Cravath.
Yep.
Cravath, Swain and Moore is the name. And I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And she was the one who suggested, she said, Emily, there's 1,000,001 in law firms in New York City. Have you ever thought of being a legal recruiter? And I said, I had zero exposure to this route.
Right.
I don't come from a background. No one in my family is connected to the law. For me, especially at those first couple of interviews, it was just getting used to a lot of long last names. And I was connected to this recruiter at Cravath. They didn't have an internal recruiter position open, but that woman connected me to a recruitment firm that works with recruiters. And I went on a lot of interviews, and I landed my first recruiting assistance role at the law firm of Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz.
Wow.
And so that's how my recruiting career began.
That's a big time firm too, so that deserves
Yeah,
congratulations.
yeah. And it was, I think, right, a lot of our careers are about timing, and there happened to be a need in the department at that particular moment, which is why I love the Europe story,
Yep.
because it was that moment where I had come back, where now this need opened up, right? And so you meet people for a reason, and
Yep.
you go on this path. And I interviewed at Wachtell on a Friday, and the woman who interviewed said to me, I'm going to think about it over the weekend and get back to you. And I said to myself when I walked out of that interview, I said, if I get an offer to join this firm, then my decision is made.
Wow.
And I just, sometimes I feel this pulling. And in that particular instance, I said, this is it. And I didn't even waffle with the decision.
So what did you like about it?
And
Like, was there anything like you particularly liked about it that drew you in, or
yeah,
I
so
mean, I know you had stopped
yeah,
your other job in publishing and that sort of thing, but like what was it about recruiting?
yeah. Well, I think there's a really exciting energy, particularly that lawyers have. There's an intellectualism
Okay.
that I really appreciate working in the legal field. And couple that with going to law school campuses and interacting with students and facilitating the OCI process. This is what I was doing my
Okay.
first
Okay.
legal assistant job. When you work for a firm, your recruiting looks a little bit different.
Right.
And I was in my early 20s, and so I was the same age as a lot of these summer associates.
Right.
And
Right.
so for me, right, there was this excitement and buzz of being sort of young and single in New York City and being a part of this program that was sort of fostering relationships,
Yep.
and I was new to Manhattan. And so it was just nice to connect with a lot of the people that I was working with, and sort of start to build a social network for myself.
Okay. That's awesome.
Uh,
What was it
yeah,
like?
and
Go ahead.
this, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and the summer program is what I dove right into when I first started. And I was just in love with the idea of planning events, being part of these events,
Yep.
seeing Manhattan. I think it's, learning about the recruitment process. And as I got more and more dialed into the job, right, there's more than just planning summer events. But at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
it really, there was such a buzz and such an energy, and the people I met were just wonderful,
Yeah.
and I really, I loved it there.
That's awesome. Yeah. So like, what was it like to recruit? I mean, I guess you didn't really know anything different, but like recruiting in big law must be kind of different than recruiting anywhere else, right? Do you know like are there
Yeah,
differences? Do you know the differences?
yeah. So for my role at my particular firm, I would say 90% of the work that I was doing was facilitating the OCI process.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay.
and then also the 1L hiring. We had we did a lot of work with our summer program, and then also the hiring for the summer program, which continued all year round, in addition to clerkship hiring and that type of thing. But I
Wow.
would say the biggest difference that my job then as an internal big law firm recruiter is that a lot of the candidate pool was already funneled to me.
Mm.
So my role was a bit more on the facilitating side
Okay.
and less so on the like, let's pound the phones and get these people in the
Yeah, yeah.
door.
Okay.
It was more about ensuring that the candidates and also the summer associates who spent time at our firm had a positive experience. And
Gotcha.
whether that was through the interview process, having their questions answered on a timely manner, making sure that their offers have been discussed and reviewed, and getting back to candidates was a big piece of the work that I was doing on the law firm side.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense that they're funneled more to you because, um, the law school, puts them off to you. Or if they have like certain grades, they're probably coming your way, and so you sort of know what you're to expect from these candidates that you're getting.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. And with the laterals, we would get write-ins, or we would also work with search firms, in fact, similar
Yeah.
to where I'm on now. So I've been on both sides of the table there.
How long were
when
you
it
at
comes
Travis
to leading.
for?
Oh, I was at Wachtell.
Oh,
I
sorry.
was there for 15. Yeah. Cravath was the woman who I climbed with, but then ultimately I ended up at Wachtell
Oh,
Lipton.
that's
And
right. So
so
she was a
she was an associate.
assistant.
Yeah. And they didn't
Yeah.
have a job there. And so,
So how long you were at 15
so
years? Wow.
yeah, almost 15. I should, it was about 14 and I think 9.5 months.
It's unbelievable. So you you kind of pivoted to like going to Pilates, is that, or did you do that
Yes,
as you were doing recruiting?
exactly.
How did that work? Tell us.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. Oh, it was a lot. Around the time I was going for my Pilates certification, which is very time intensive, I thought that I might want to explore a role as a Pilates studio owner or a Pilates manager. And I felt the best way to learn was to start with getting certified. So take baby steps before making this big change. So as I was going for my certification, it all culminated in me deciding that I wanted to have a little bit more of a change of schedule, possibly less required evening time, which began the transition to the search firm side.
Okay.
But so essentially the Pilates started as a side hustle.
Nice.
With possibly going full time in Pilates if everything worked out. Now, this is the beauty of having a side hustle. You kind of get to dabble in it first before you make this giant decision that this is what you're going to do. And
Right.
as luck would have it, I did go down the Pilates angle, and I taught in Brooklyn, and I also managed a Pilates studio. I didn't own it, but I managed one, and I recruited all at the same time.
Wow.
And ultimately, I did this for about 3 or 4 years, and it was very difficult and exhausting. But I was able to enjoy it. But I reached a point where I decided that in order for me to be effective, I need to make a decision in terms of what that will be.
Okay.
And I missed being in an office. I never thought I would say that.
Right.
And this was before the pandemic. Ironically, I wanted to put on my work clothes again. I wanted to live a certain corporate life.
The routine, I don't
That
know, like for me, it's like I kind of like the routine. I mean, I have like a regular, like, I don't want to say 9 to 5 because it's like really like a little more than that, but I like personally like the the routine of it. I mean, you know, sometimes you need a little break, but I don't know if that's
Yeah,
anything,
and
but that's sort of how I feel.
yeah, that had a lot to do with it. And I missed being in the action of the office setting. And at the time, I was working 100% remotely for a different search firm.
Okay.
And what I really wanted to do was just go back to an office. And and initially, what had drawn me to recruiting to begin with was I do like the social component. I do like working with a team in sort of like, for whatever you call it, the water cooler setting.
Right.
I like sharing ideas.
Yep.
I like that buzz. I
Okay.
like that buzz. And so I made that decision to return full time. I was subbing on Saturdays, but in
Yep.
Pilates, but I made the decision to return full time to recruiting in the fall of 2019, which at the time was one of the wisest decisions I ever could have made, because
Wow.
who knew what was coming down the pipe
Right.
in February, March of 2020 with the
Right.
COVID pandemic. And, you know, thank goodness I didn't open up a Pilates studio. Uh, and
Yeah.
so I had settled back into office life again. And I'm glad, because the Pilates studio that I was a part of had shut down. And so I did have this sense of corporate connection
Yep.
during the pandemic, which I thought was integral to me getting through it. You know, especially at the beginning, no one knew what was going on. I think my office had 2 or 3 meetings a week just to get us together emotionally. And I think that was really helpful for me to have the new job all at the same time.
Wow. Okay. So, and that was a search firm, right? That did
Correct.
so
Yep,
is
yep.
there
And the
a
one I'm
difference
still at.
is there a difference between like a between recruiting and a search firm? No,
Essentially, they're the same.
it's the same
Yep,
thing.
yep, yeah, yeah. So if someone says, "Oh, hi, hi, I'm Emily. I work at a recruitment firm. I work at a search firm, or I work at an agency," um, they're often interchangeable in
So what's
terms
the difference
of what
between
that.
the place you're at now, or the search firm you went to, and then Walktel? Is that how you pronounce it?
Oh, sure, sure. Wachtell, sure. So Wachtell is a law firm,
Yeah, it's a firm.
and
You're
so
in the house of a
yeah,
law
and
firm. Okay.
yeah, and so the difference is that when I worked there, I was an employee of the firm,
Right. Okay. Got it.
and I was recruiting exclusively for the firm.
Okay.
And what we did then was we would reach out to agencies, search firms, recruiting agents, whatever you want to call them at the time, and asking them for candidates. So we were that client saying, here's what we need, here's the skill set that we require, et cetera. So now I'm just on the other side.
Right.
And so where my role has changed is that now there's a lot more me going after talent as opposed to talent being funneled to me.
And you're probably working with a lot of different firms, right? Is that how it works?
Correct. Correct. Right. As a search firm
Yeah.
recruiter, you have a lot of clients, and it depends who you've developed relationships with. And basically
That's
the
great.
beauty of my work is I get to have freedom over the types of searches that I work on. So for example, I do gravitate towards startups
Mhm.
and tech and life sciences. So often I'll work with a lot of these law firms that might be looking for that type of lawyer specifically.
Are you only doing New York City, or are you sort of Can it branch
We
out
go all over. Yep,
over
we're all over the country.
for
Yep.
different firms? So you have clients that are
Yep.
firms in different. Okay, that's awesome.
Yep.
So,
I do a lot of work with California firms, especially
okay,
being in the startup space.
that's good to
So
know.
yeah,
So,
especially yep.
no, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of New York firms and California firms, people are often moving from one coast to the next.
Yeah.
In the world that I'm in the startup tech and digital health world, there's a lot of coast to coast movement,
Right.
particularly in the tech hubs.
Okay. So, what advice would you give to an attorney working with a legal search firm?
Yeah. Okay. I would say the biggest piece of advice, and this can often be a stumbling block for people, is to walk in with an open mind. The more open you are to suggestions, particularly from your recruiter who has a very different vantage point from you, often helps the process, because
Okay.
ultimately, you and I know this, successful careers are built on relationships and less about reputations that people have heard, less about what a job description looks like, less about what you think a particular department looks like. It's a lot of how it feels once you talk to the people that you meet with and see who you're going to be interacting with on a daily basis. So when you have an open mind and you are not as specific with your requirements, now, obviously, it helps to know what you want to do and the type and the areas that you want to be in. But and I understand certain people have salary cutoffs. That is understandable. But anything outside of that, one person's experience at a particular law firm or in-house company may be very different than your potential experience or the others that might be happily employed there. And so often where I see people get stuck is either relying on reputation, relying on a job description. Trust your recruiter.
Gotcha.
Trust your recruiter when they make a suggestion to explore a certain angle that they might not have thought of before.
I like that. I think that's like great advice. Trust your recruiter, everybody. That's really good. No, I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Doing a lot
Thank
because I think in your profession, like you're part of the legal profession and you're doing a lot of work, like a lot of homework for everybody, for these people, and like they are too, but you see it from a different angle and you've been through it before with people, so people should trust their recruiter. I love that, Emily. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Tell us about specializing in tech and health law.
Yeah. Okay. So here I'm going to throw in another story. We're on the Lawyer Stories podcast. So
Let's go.
Every good story has to start somewhere, and I do have another story, and in fact it involves my old law firm. When I started in recruitment, I did not have a specialty. I mostly did on-campus recruitment, a little bit of lateral hiring here and there with litigation, corporate. And so when I went over to the agency side, I reconnected with a former Wachtell associate that had since left Wachtell and started working for a biotech company. And I had very little exposure to life sciences law, healthcare law prior to this connection. And we connected over Facebook about a restaurant that I had wanted to try in Brooklyn. And so we reconnected. I hadn't heard from him in a while. And I was trying to remember the name of this restaurant that he had recommended when he was an associate. And we connected the dots, and he realized that I was now in search firm recruiting. And he said, "Oh, Emily," he said, "I'm, just started working at this biotech company, but we are looking for a corporate counsel. Can you help us?" And he introduced
Awesome.
me to their internal recruitment person. And I started working directly with this biotech company, trying to find their commercial counsel. It ended up being more than one, but this
Wow.
is where the Rolodex begins. And that we had talked about
Okay.
this at the beginning of the podcast, that started the specialization, because now I gained exposure to this type of legal recruitment, particularly in the life sciences and healthcare field, and loved it. And so I not only did I like the work, I liked the people that I was placing. And so the spiral starts to, unfold.
Interesting.
And yeah, and I continue to do this work with biotech company. And as you know, if once you do a good job with one company, then people will reach out to you and want to work with you. And clients were referring me to other companies in the tech and life sciences field.
Wow.
And
That's great.
so and then I continued to build my connections, and just I felt very emotionally attached to the work in this space. I think particularly because I had just come out of becoming a Pilates teacher and realizing the value of health and healthcare and taking care of wellness. I see all of the connections, and it's given me a space to feel passionate about what I do, which I'm very grateful
That's
for.
awesome. Yeah, that's really awesome. Congrats on finding that.
Thank you. Yeah. And, the more and more I dial in, particularly now there's so many podcasts out there.
Mhm.
So if learning about different areas of the law, for example, health tech, there's femtech, there's all different directions that working in this space as a lawyer can go. And that's the
Right.
fun part.
Yeah. So how do you like being a podcast host?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I didn't mention this, but when I was a kid, I used to play. I used to record myself as a video D, as a sorry, not a video DJ, as a DJ into my audio cassette player.
Yep.
Back in the day, you had to press the
I
button and
know.
hold
I
it
had them too. I
down
had them too.
with with the tapes that got caught. Some
Yep.
of your listeners are probably not even going to know what I'm
Oh,
referring
but
to,
I do. I know
but
exactly what you're talking about.
you do.
Yeah.
And you didn't have computers as a kid. I didn't have a computer as a kid. So outside of books, if you had time alone in your bedroom, you wanted to find ways to entertain yourself. In fact, we didn't even have telephones in our rooms back then.
Right. Those were
So,
definitely a
I
luxury
had my,
having that. So
yeah. So I had my audio cassette player and my books.
yeah,
And I used to pretend I was a DJ.
yeah, that's
And
awesome.
so, yeah.
I
And
still do like
so
to
when
pretend
it
I'm a
came,
DJ. So I mean, I don't. It's
oh,
nothing wrong with that.
yeah, it's so much. I mean, now you can create your own Spotify list and you
Sometimes in
can
my
talk
car,
into it. And especially,
I'm my
yeah,
best DJ. What can I say?
it's so much fun. And so when the pandemic rolled around when it came, I wanted to go after this dream of being this radio DJ through the medium of podcasting.
Yeah. Wow.
And when I started, I was a little all over the place. I started the podcast about being your authentic self in the workplace, but I've since brought it a little closer to the work that I'm doing now, while also going into that aspect of being your authentic self. But right now it's
Beyond the Legal Lens. I love that name.
Yes.
Beyond the Legal Lens. How long have you been doing it for?
Since the dream came alive in 2020 was when I started to get the ball rolling. I think I published my first episode in 2021.
That's awesome. Congrats. That's wicked cool. It's a lot of fun. It's great. That's great.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I didn't realize is how wonderful it is to connect to the people with your interviewing at a much different level than, let's say, making a cold call.
Yeah. Yeah. Who are you? So,
I mean, look at our conversation now.
Who are you interviewing on your show? Like, who are your guests?
Sure. Yeah. So right now, the premise of the podcast is how to open the door to jobs in tech and health law.
Okay.
So my current guests are often lawyers who have taken a path from usually the path that I had, from big law to now either continuing to work in big law for startups, or perhaps maybe they have left big law to go in-house and now they're working in tech and health law, or they have become part of a boutique, which we're seeing a lot more of, or they have become solo practitioners, they've had this experience in big law and have now taken it to their own desks. And essentially I asked them tips and advice for how they got to where they are now. And I'd like to advise not just lawyers, but law students that might be interested in pursuing this kind of work specifically, because it's a very niche area of the law. And I think a lot of law students might not necessarily understand the different paths that are out. In fact, I'm still learning the different jobs you can take myself.
So should people come to, I just want to ask this before I forget. Like, I don't mean to cut you off, but like,
sure.
Should people come to you for any type of legal job? Or are you really, I know you're narrowing and you have a niche now, but like, if somebody comes along and says, hey, like I'm looking to move, like, can they come to you for anything?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I specialize in this area, it does not cut me off from the other areas of the law as well. I have training. I have a Rolodex in other areas also. It was just, this is where I've chosen the main part of the work, but that it is not exclusive to that kind.
Okay. No, it's very important. What you do is like a very important part of the legal profession. So thank you for finding people jobs.
Oh, thank
you. Helping people
fit
in with their puzzle. You know what I mean? Like being that puzzle piece that fits in.
So, it can be very rewarding on that level.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. When you connect somebody and they call you and they say, "Hey, this job's great," like whatever. I'm assuming you get some calls like that or notes or
and even on the reverse. In fact, this happened this morning. I was speaking with an in-house client, and the person who I was working with to find their very first legal hire, I just got a message from him saying that the person that they ultimately hired through me is phenomenal and she's doing great. And so it's nice to hear it on both sides, that the client's needs and the candidate's needs are fulfilled.
That's great. So tell us about any other special projects that you're working on now. I think there were a couple that you might have.
Oh, yeah. I know we don't have all night, but I'll start with a passion project of mine that I want to focus on a little bit more. It comes in waves depending on my availability, but I've created a separate platform outside of my podcast, outside of my current recruiting work, and it's called The Advocates Mic.
Okay.
And The Advocates Mic highlights mission-driven attorneys who are creating impactful initiatives for their communities.
Gotcha.
And it's yet to become a podcast, but it starts out with videos, similar to what we're doing here. Ideally, when we started it, we wanted to do every interview in person, which, I certainly don't have the budget yet for that. But, it would have been a dream to travel and interview people in foreign countries, but maybe someday. But I thought the brief moments, not brief, but the moments where I entertained being a lawyer myself, which I never became, I really felt that I would have loved doing public interest law. And so I do think this platform is a way for me to connect with that side of my personality and still have it be tangential to the people who I'm working with now, in terms of the lawyers. They are often, the ones that I'm highlighting either started their careers in public interest or still in public interest law, or are working for nonprofits and doing that type of work, or even working at law firms and doing things on the side.
Emily, it's never too late to go to law school.
Yes, I for those who know me, I love to study. So
sounds like a good
I love to study and read books. And so I'm a big believer, it's never too late in life to do anything.
It's not too late, so maybe that's another conversation though for another time. So that's okay. So that's really interesting. You got like a bunch of stuff that you're working on. I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the firm you might be at now, or like you can certainly do that if you'd like?
Yeah, sure. So the current search firm I'm with now, it's called Whistler Partners, and we are at the intersection of tech, media, and entertainment. And we place attorneys, exclusively attorneys, into in-house roles or law firm roles that usually intersect in the tech and startup space, although once again, not exclusively. So if someone were to reach out to us in a role that isn't necessarily working in startup law or for a tech company, we also place to those types of positions as well.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, we pride ourselves in being matchmakers. So
like, have you ever worked with people who like are like attorneys who weren't top of their class? I'm guessing Wachtell, like obviously like that's a great law firm and everybody was like just gunners in law school. And have you worked with people that are just like never went through the on-campus interview process and just struggled to find a job? Like, have you placed any of those type of law students and lawyers?
Yeah, my work, and this can vary from recruiter to recruiter, so I do want to put that out there.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of my work is driven by the client's need.
Okay.
And so if I have a client that is looking for a particular skill set, it might not always fall into this box
Right.
of, this elite background, so to speak. It really is dictated, by the searches that I'm working on at a particular moment. So
Like at Walktel,
that is a very long.
Walktel, you must have been looking at things like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like these people, like they're like, cream.
Yeah, it was so impressive to see the backgrounds of the people that were hired there, and also it was such an incredible environment to work in. Right, I was in a very intellectually stimulating environment. There's a lot of buzz, but the backgrounds were so impressive. Absolutely. I used to just be amazed at what some of our candidates had accomplished, like as 1L students. It was always pretty mind-blowing.
Right. No, that's amazing. I mean, I got my first job through like it was more of a temp agency though, so it wasn't really like a recruiter, but that's super interesting. You're doing really good work, and like we'll definitely
oh, thank you.
If you see anybody on Lawyer Stories like you ever want to connect with, just like at the Lawyer Stories Connect event in Brooklyn, like I'm happy to make a warm introduction for you. So just keep
terrific. Thank you. And
perusing like the account, if I know somebody or if you see somebody in the podcast, maybe not some of the more famous icons that we've had on, but some other practitioners, we'd be happy to definitely introduce you.
Oh, thank you, and same to you. I appreciate the offer.
Thank you so much. Is there anything we've like left out today that you wanted to talk about?
I think the only other thing that I want to say is the one area that I started my podcast with that I stopped is when you're looking for work. I think one of the most important things that you should be looking for is an environment that's going to nurture and cultivate you so that you can feel comfortable being who you are. For example, like right now with you on this podcast, I feel very comfortable and I'm not holding myself back. And I felt that way at your connection event in Brooklyn. And so to tap into that and, find your people that allow you to be you, I think is so important, because once you can find the environment that feels right and you can take away the barriers and let your guard down, I really believe you'll do your best work.
I think that's so true. And I love that advice. Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
telling us that. And if there's anything else, I think this was a great episode, and I really appreciate
thank you.
And please go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I loved it as well, and I'm I hope we can find ways to do more things together, because
we will.
It's a blast.
We will. So please stay there, and everybody, thanks for tuning in. Wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.